Let's jump in. From Tent to Tomb is a sermon series to illustrate how Jesus' moment at the cross is this reminder of how much went into it for thousands of years leading up to it. So when I say from tent to tomb, I mean that there is a real sense of Jesus figuring out how to answer, fulfill what had been already a part of his whole existence. Remember, Jesus didn't have a beginning. He already was. Through him, all things were made, Colossians chapter 1. And I want to share that sermon series with you this morning to kind of revisit how we are going to get to Easter and be transformed. Now, let me give you an example, a little quick reminder of the different Sundays we're going to do it through, and then I'll go ahead and do that review. Next Sunday is April 5th. Or next Sunday is March 1st. We're going to climb the mountain, if you will. We're going to talk today about the gate. Next Sunday, March 8th, we're going to talk about the mikvah. Does anybody know what a mikvah is? Right over here, folks. If I gave you a visual of the early temple, that mikvah bath would actually be out in it'd be out in the parking lot. Could you imagine showing up to church and then you get into the mikvah, the baptism, come out and come into church? That was the temple. The way the temple was set up was mikvah baths were around as a purification ritual. Today we call it believer's baptism, where you come in and you say, I'm going to let people know visually that this purification of Jesus in my heart has changed my life. In Jesus' day, they did it routinely. They did it, ladies, after that time of the month. Men, you would have different rituals if you were unclean. If you handled dead people, you would go through the mikvah bath. You'd have purification ceremonies to go into the temple. Why? Because you couldn't come into the temple being dirty, unclean. So you'd have this mikvah bath, and then you come in. Well, then you come in, and in the temple, you would have the courts. So in a couple weeks, we're going to talk about how we're getting closer to God in the temple with the Gentile court. And then inside the Gentile court, sorry ladies, was the court of women. They were still left out because then you could go a little farther in. You could have the court of the Israelites. And then inside that, you could have the priests, the court of the priests. And then inside was the holy space. And then inside that was the Holy of Holies. Notice how we're taking you deeper into the temple. And we're going to share with you how important it is to see that in light of Jesus today. We're going to compare and contrast that a little bit. So my point is, if any of you want to get baptized, I said we're not just waiting for the pond. We'll do that at Easter. Come on in. You'll go, I'm not ready to get baptized. I don't have anything. We've got shorts. We've got T-shirts. We've got towels. We make it real simple. You just, ladies over here, men over here, you go in, you get changed. If you came next Sunday and you said, I want to get baptized this morning, baptism comes with our believer's baptism. We talk about it in two forms. We talk about it in terms of your first, this is going to be terrible, Mike. I'm going to have to kick me off of here. This is the full disclosure. I couldn't find my, I couldn't find my iPad, okay? I don't know where it is. So I was going to share from the computer, but I'm like, I can't share from the computer and go through my notes. We may have to switch that up. So, I want you to be thinking about how do you grow closer to God. And if one of them is, we do it with two things in mind. Maybe you just came to a life-changing experience with Jesus. You want to let people know you get baptized. Maybe it's a rededication. So if you're here this morning and you go, my heart has been hardened, we don't want you to feel like you got to get baptized every time you change your underwear, right? Like it's not one of those. It's not the mikvah bath that it was in the time of the temple. But it is one where you could do a dedication and say, I'm going to go ahead and do this as a rededication of my faith in Jesus and have other people know. Now, if the deacons, if you guys want to take that out there into the parking lot and have a revival, and everybody comes in, you're like, hey, you want to get baptized? You want to rededicate your life? Okay, you guys go ahead and do that. It still feels really cold next week. We go to the pond. It is cold, but I just want you to be thinking about what is going to be leaning you in. And, of course, we're going to enter into the courts. We're going to talk about the altar, and we're going to make our way into the Holy of Holies. And, of course, most people know the veil that separated the priest who went in once a year, Yom Kippur, into the Holy of Holies. Only one priest, only one time of the year to enter in the space. We'll talk about how powerful that metaphor, that image is for Jesus, too. Okay, well, let's do a quick review of where we came from. I told you that last week we are all on the mountaintop. Ezekiel says that the Garden of Eden was found on a mountaintop. So last week when I said we were cast off the mountain, when Adam and Eve sinned, they fell off the top of the mountain. And we have been since trying to make our way up. But even as Dylan just prayed a little bit ago, we don't have to earn that relationship. We have to accept it through Jesus, who will then be the one who comes down and receives us, finds us. But there's still things that need to change in us. And we go through these different characters to appreciate how much they valued the right relationship with God. So Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden. They're cast off the mountain. Abraham goes back up the mountain. Most people don't know Mount Moriah, where he offered Isaac as a sacrifice, is in the same location as Jerusalem. Mount Moriah, that same place that Abraham went up into in Genesis 22, is the same place that the Temple Mount is. Well, eventually, we have Abraham's descendants. They end up being slaves in Egypt. They escape Egypt. They go to Mount Sinai. Now, Mount Sinai is in the southern, Arabian desert. And that Mount Sinai is where God gave them the law. And in that he said, here's a tabernacle. Build this and take this with you. Well, that tabernacle was supposed to represent, even if we couldn't achieve our relationship with God, that God would come down and be with us. In the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle, the priests believed that when he went in there, he actually left earth. Like, anybody seen the latest Superman? You just sort of get into a portal and you're automatically in a different place. This is what the priests believed. When you went into the Holy of Holies, you entered into the presence of God, the Shekinah of God, so that you were no longer in the space of the earth, but you were in the dwelling place of God. So it was like, the prayer, heaven on earth. That was it. The Holy of Holies, heaven on earth. When you went into there, you were in the space of God's heavenly dwelling, right? So now all of a sudden we've got the perfect, in Jesus' name. I have a feeling an iPad's going to show up on my desk. So I don't have a desk right now, okay? Can we be honest about this? Whole thing's just all in transition. My office has been taken over, and I'm moving over to the birdhouse. I say my office, we were switching over to the birdhouse. We have offices over there. We're moving stuff over there. Janie, I got to just say it out loud. Janie and I are moving the desk, and the whole back legs fall off. My desk fell apart. I'm like, I got to have a home. I'm the wandering desert, I guess you say. So I don't know where it is. But don't lose sight of how important this moment is. The tabernacle was ushering in God, who was on the mountaintop. We can't get to Eden. I'm going to give you how cool this was. Guess what is on the veil? Cherubim. Guess what are on the Ark of the Covenant when you go in? The cherubim. Does anybody know what's guarding the Garden of Eden? Cherubim. They were cast out. Cherubim were put in front, a flaming sword to keep them out that they could never usher back in. The tabernacle is supposed to be Eden again. The priest who could go into the presence of God, the living God. Well, ultimately that turned into the tabernacle. Now we talk about the tabernacle. That was what was found in the middle. Let me see if I could just play this without it losing its mind on me. Let's see if it's extended play. See if you guys are smarter than me. I'm not going to work. You're not going to. I'm getting a spinning wheel of death. Loading. Do it. Don't worry. I'm just right in the middle of my sermon here. That'd be great. There we go. Thank you. This is Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. So now they came back up to Mount Moriah. King David eventually conquered Jerusalem, placed the capital there, and then he told Solomon his son, build a temple for God. We can't have them living in the tabernacle. But the temple is a replica of the tabernacle, just now in stone, now permanent. Well, Herod the Great, after it had been destroyed and rebuilt, Herod the Great built it even grander scale. And you see it just sort of a monument in the middle of Jerusalem in that first century. Well, what do we get out of this picture? I want to talk this morning about the walls. Not only did they now establish the temple, they had to protect it. In the city of Jerusalem, then around were placed all of these walls. And I know we can get into our politics today. Build the wall. That's so offensive to build the wall. I don't want you to get crazy about it. I want you to understand that there's going to be a simple understanding of ancient Israel, and that was the protection of its people. And you found yourself either inside the wall or outside of the wall, outside of the city gates. If you're outside of the city gates, you were vulnerable. If you were inside the city gates, then you were protected. But you had to get into the city gates because you had to have something that put you in that city that made you a viable person, a Jew or a friend of the Jews, to go in there. So David says, build this temple, but then as we build the city, Solomon built a wall all the way around the temple. Now, there's a north gate, there's a western gate, there's on the south, by the way, there's a dung gate. Yes, it's named for that particular reason. That valley that came through there, you see that pool at the very bottom, that used to all be a valley of ancient Jerusalem, and all of the waste would go that direction. Well, they finally did some great architecture over it, and so then it just became an underground sewage system. But then, of course, I told you about the East Gate last week that the Sultan cemented in because we're afraid of Jesus returning to that East Gate. By the way, does anybody remember when the Garden of Eden was blocked off, what side were they kicked out of? They were sent out the east. They were kicked out to the east. So who's going to redeem those who are kicked out? Well, he's going to reverse all of that, isn't he? He's going to come in through the East Gate. So the temple has walls for protection. Access mattered. You could enter freely as long as you were a friend of the Jews. But there's also a sense of the walls. Now, at first, somebody's going to say, well, you can't wall things up. Now, listen, none of you sleep without locking your doors. So let's be honest. You're going to have a reason for protection. Even Jesus said, you can go to John chapter 10, the enemy, how does the enemy get in? He comes over the wall. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But the shepherd who's meant to, comes through the gate. They hear my voice and they listen. Even Jesus knew there was a very challenge to how we perceived a relationship with God that had limitations. How do we overcome? What's the right gate? How do we enter? How do we get permission? Well, let's go ahead and explain that. Well, we're going to do this short time of exploration of this text and getting over the walls, through the walls. I want you to go ahead, if you want to look up Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. You can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and its gate is wide for the many who choose that way. But the gate to life is very narrow, and the road is difficult, and only a few ever find it. It doesn't sound like Jesus is taking the gates down or taking the walls down. It doesn't sound like he's making it a lot easier. He's actually making it harder. He says, wait a second. Let me tell you about these walls. Let me tell you about the gates that you're supposed to get into. Not only do you have to get into the city. Now, let's follow this. You get into the city, you go to Herod's temple. You're going to have to go in the southern gate. When you get up into the temple, you're going to have the Gentile court. If you're a Gentile, that's the farthest you can go. If you're an Israelite, you can go inside the Gentile court, and you're in the women's court. And if you're a woman, you can't go past that, but the men can go into the court of the Israelites. You can see how there's limitations to how far you can go. Jesus sort of doubles down on this, and he says, it's impossible. The path to righteousness, to heaven, to the kingdom of heaven, that place that's in the middle of the Holy of Holies, right? God's kingdom on earth, the place where the Shekinah of God, the dwelling of God. You want me to say it's easy to get there. Let me tell you, it's even harder than you thought. And the gate to get through to that place is far more difficult than you can imagine. The highway to hell, that's broad. And the gate for that is wide, meaning it's just wide open for anybody who chooses it. Now, if you're here this morning, you know this sermon that comes with that scripture verse is very simple. At first, you understand the broad road is easy, popular, and self-destructive. We just talked about this at the men's breakfast, about work ethic and how easy it is to just not do things. It's easier to stay in bed than it is to get up and go to work. It's easier to miss church than it is to come to church. It's easier to just not solve problems and doom scroll or binge watch. There's a lot of things that are easier. We talked about our kids and our culture today, that it's just easier to not challenge them. I said this at Reach Up, and it related to the men's group as well. I said, how many of you go to bed? They said, well, I'm supposed to be in bed at 9 p.m. I said, what if we added to 9 p.m. no screen time, no phone, no tablet, no TV? And all of a sudden it became almost punishing. What? I don't mind if I have to go to bed at 9, but I'm not actually going to bed. I got something else that I can do. And then our kids, they sort of disappear into that false light. And hours later, they go to bed. They don't wake up. They're not ready for the next day. And then add on top of that, when we send our kids to school, it's never their fault. It's never their problem. Kids can't fail. Parents spend thousands of dollars on sports, so when you go to the game, if your kid doesn't play, doesn't get activity, doesn't get quality, you go, it's the coach's fault. Now, sometimes it is, don't get me wrong. It drove me nuts when I drive to Staunton, and I go, how did I drive here, pay $5 to get into the game, and I got to watch 1 minute of basketball when we were losing by 40. I put the other kids in fourth grade basketball. But the flip side is really true, isn't it? We really don't challenge our kids. My challenge in that same respect is, how many parents send their kids out to play basketball on their own? Well, they do it when they go to practice, but do they do it at home? Well, no, that would be work. It's just easier to not do that than it is to do it. I'll give you another one. How many of you, when you say I have chores for my kids, your chores for your kids are usually the things your kids should be doing? Anybody grow up in a generation that putting my clothes away wasn't a chore? That's what I did. The chore was mowing the yard, taking the garbage out, cleaning the car. There's a real good one. How many of you go through the drive-thru to wash your car? Can you imagine if your kids had to wash it? Anybody have the white walls on the tires? He had to get the SOS pad out. My dad was serious about that. He's like, make sure those shine. You're just scrubbing the white wall off the... Why? Because I got paid? No. Because it was a chore. It was a responsibility. So we know how easy it is to say the broad road makes perfect sense. It's easier. We can get into sexual ethics. It's easier to have sex than the commitment that's supposed to come with it. How about stress? It's easier to avoid it. Drink more, scroll more, do less. Address it less. And biblically, it was easier to defy the city pattern and not go through all those hoops to get into a relationship with God. But this is where it changes. Unlike today, when you don't do it, you don't really seem to suffer as much. In Jesus' day, if you didn't get into the city and it became nighttime, you were at risk. That's why he says the path to hell, the cast out, the weeping and gnashing of teeth, you were the one who would suffer. You were vulnerable. The narrow gate includes a way of life in accordance with those who monitor it. You have to offer intentional living to meet those standards to get through. So what does Jesus mean? Is he making it harder for us when he says to enter the kingdom of God is through the narrow gate? You ready for this? It's not his gate he's worried about. Let me say it differently. It is the sin that separates us, kicks us off the mountain, and keeps us away from God. And when you ask yourself, but how do I get right with God? God says, well, that path is difficult. And you go, difficult? You mean I can't live up to it? I can't do all the responsibilities of the temple? I can't do all the things that God's telling me I'm supposed to do? I can't earn it back? And Jesus is telling you in this simple scripture, you missed the point. The reason it's a narrow gate is because it comes from you. It's the gate on your heart. The tallest wall isn't what God has established in front of you. It is what you have built inside of you. We can come to God through Jesus, but to do that is a willingness and a confession. Can I tell you why the baptismal never gets full? Because we don't want to be vulnerable in the first place. If you're being honest about it, I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to be put in that position. I don't want to admit to people that I'm a sinner and I fall short of the glory of God. We talk about this with our deacons. I think the best place to start as a church is when our deacons come to the altar. When our deacons are vulnerable. At the men's group, one of our men that's very strong of faith vulnerably admitted about how he was so thankful for a community of men. Not that he stood on his own and he said, I achieved this. But he was willing to say, I needed others, and when I needed you most, you were there. We struggle with that wall, of taking that wall down. Jesus is going to the lost sheep. Jesus is going to eat with Nicodemus. Jesus is going to the boat with Peter and James. He's going to come and meet you. But when he gets to you, is your wall still too tall? He says in Revelation 3:20, yea, I stand at the door and knock. I came to you. I can't get in. That's why it's narrow. That's why it's hard, because you have to choose. Matthew 22 is a great parable, the parable of the feast. And in the parable, it says that he invited all the guests to a great banquet, and they didn't show up. Most of them know this part. And so he said, go out and find anybody that'll show up. Invite everybody. If you're here this morning, you're invited. You come past the walls. You come past the city gates. Come in, you're invited. But who is the one who is not allowed to be in? It says one of them that came wasn't in wedding clothes. And he was cast out. And you look at it and you go, that seems mean. He didn't have the right clothes on and you threw him out of the banquet? Guess what they did at a wedding banquet in first century? When you showed up, they had garments for you. They said, come in. You who are blessed to be here, wear this, be a part of this great banquet. But if the person was unwilling to put on the wedding clothes, they were there for an alternative reason. You can't have it both. You can't want God's salvation and not your confession. You got to take off the sinner's clothes. You can't come to Jesus wearing your old clothes. You can't come to Jesus wearing your old life. And I know this is where we're really getting into it, right? Because how many of us have thought, I come to Jesus, and he's a good teacher, and he gives me good morals? Church, listen to me. This is the preacher saying this. Still to this day, the beginning point of my conversation with Jesus is, Father, forgive me, for I have sinned and I fall short of the glory of God. That's it. I probably say that, if not once a day, 2 or 3 times a day. It is what starts my prayer in the morning. Father, forgive me, for I fall short of the glory of God. Father, forgive me. Father, forgive me. I haven't even started my day. Father, forgive me. If somebody says, what do you like about your church? I hope you don't say my pastor and all of his accolades or his preaching or the worship style. I hope you say this. They're transparent. They're real. They'll tell you they're imperfect people. Even their best leaders will be honest about how they don't get it right, how they break tables. We can't even get things moved without breaking things. So here's what I want you to do this morning. If you're here this morning and you say, I want to feel better, you've entered to be entertained, but not transformed. If you're here to be happy, but not holy, I want you to confess your apathy, your ambivalence. I want you to come into the throne room. When you come up to communion this morning, I want you to receive communion as if you have entered the throne room, the Holy of Holies. And I want you to ask yourself the question, what am I wearing? Am I ready and willing to take off my outside clothes to put on the internal holy garments? What do I need to do? This isn't adding on. This isn't putting more stuff on. This is removing stuff. There's something in your life that is still sort of taking time away from your intimacy with God. And I don't mean about adding another Bible study. I'm just saying, what's the confession? If we're going to get into the Holy of Holies, we have to be transformed in some way. If you don't think a little bit different after this morning, if you haven't offered God a part of the resurrection, right? Your part of the resurrection. His part is already done. Your part is confession, right? The resurrection didn't just happen on the outside, it happens on the inside. How do I take down that wall and receive more of him? If you've already done that, then it's doing it a little bit more daily, right? Dying to him daily. What once is our salvation is now daily renewal to live more like him. So when I close and the worship team comes up, we're going to receive communion. I'm going to have some of the Reach Up kids are going to come up and they're going to serve you. And I'm inviting you this morning to come into that Holy of Holies when you receive communion to be fully present in the divine. That Jesus is here. Man, if this doesn't give you goosebumps to watch these young people serve you communion. And here is the kingdom of God, right? For such as, the innocence of children, let them serve you. And when you come forward, may you be in that personal, intimate presence of the divine. And may you, before you get there, make that confession. God, what is something I'm still wearing? What is the wall I'm still building? It's not going to be, you got to go through all these walls and gates to get to the Holy of Holies in the temple like it was in Jesus' day. He says it's even harder because the one you really have to get through is the one you're unwilling to let go of.